Before I introduce the first speaker, can I just tell you about another event? This is run by my colleague in Lincoln, Carenza Lewis, and it is run by the Medieval Settlement Research Group. And because it's maybe of interest to many people, I would like to mention it here. The Medieval Settlement Research Group is having a series of seminars, and they're looking at the impact of road and rail and pipelines, infrastructure projects on our understanding of medieval settlement. So the conference, it's an online conference, is on the 2nd of October, and Rainer and Meta are both speaking at it. But to get access to it, you can get access after the event, but if you want to see the event live, because it will be online, you need to go and register. So you will need to go and search for Medieval Settlement Research Group. So that's on the 2nd of October, Saturday the 2nd of October. Okay, well, let me now turn to this morning. And this morning we are looking at household objects, social and economic status. And our first speaker is Tibor Rach, and he is going to speak on Every Piece Counts, the evidence of metal detector surveys in the reconstruction of late medieval households. Tibor.
Thanks. See the presentation. Should I press on? Okay, that's it. So in my presentation, first I speak about the classification of metal detector finds in Pest County, Hungary, and then I focus on the single household excavated 2 years ago with a particular building structure and excellent finds, giving excellent data for the reconstruction of a household. Here we can analyze the social aspects of the material and also how this assemblage fits into the big picture. So the application of the metal detector device and the growing number of metal finds delivered to the museum has gradually led to the creation of a large database to the collection of archaeological information, which complements the data of earlier field research, large excavations and field surveys. And this collection in our museum comprises more than 20,000 pieces of archaeological metal finds, not including coins, and a major part of it, approximately 10 to 11,000 finds, may be dated to the Middle Ages. So you can see my first slide, okay. We interact increasingly with a complex network of civilians who are interested in archaeology in the frames of a community archaeology program, and a major part of these people are using detectors. For many years, we have led aimed field surveys with the participants, with volunteers, and these data are the result of a controlled and well-documented research. According to the data collection protocol, at least from the past 6-7 years, the objects are collected with the exact coordinates you can see there, I hope. The basis of field research is respectively a consistent procedure applied over several years, complemented with a data set of well-documented land and rescue excavations. So due to the nature of the source base, we can use these data to characterize not the individual features, but the settlements, the sites. So in our case, the medieval villages. So the medieval village is the smallest research unit which can be demarcated based on field surveys and can also be connected to villages in the written sources. I cannot deal in this presentation with the whole county, so it's too big, so I chose a smaller unit. Our sample area is the Dobos district, where 26 medieval sites were discovered, and of which only 10 were known earlier. 4 sites can be dated to the High Middle Ages, 14 to the Late Middle Ages, and 8 sites were used in both ages. About 3 times as many finds can be dated to the later period, but this is not directly proportional to the intensity or wealth of the settlement. Simply, more metal objects were used in the Late Middle Ages. So the objectives of the research project. This wide spectrum of objects find types like the vector classes, which you can see, or the object collection, neither nor as this type of process finds and highlight structure from southeast, which has over 2 meters from the temporary surface. The upper levels of the whole feature were layers of ash, soot, and talc, which made up larger unit. We presume that after the collapse of the building, the rain had washed the ruins into the cellar little by little, which led to this curved stratification with the washed layers. On the bottom of the cellar, about 170 centimeters down from the surface level, we have found the hard blasted fall made of basic clay. Its surface had several burnt red patches. After unearthing it, the feature turned out to be a standard rectangle-shaped pit with vertical lateral walls and even right-angled corners. On the bottom, along the long axis, 3 post-its were found, and along the lateral walls, the narrow bending trench was observed as a brown sandy discoloration about 20-25 centimeters in white, in which the seal beam had been placed. Its carbonized remains were found in multiple places. We have documented a unique structure on the northwestern side. Here the lateral wall was inclined rather than vertical and partly burned, but due to its slope it could not have been used as a baking surface. It's most likely that it had been used as an entranceway to wheel in large barrels, for instance. There is no explanation yet for the small post holes at the entrance. And there's another picture, an irregularly shaped circular pantry with a rectangular opening had been built in the southwestern wall of the cell. The built environment itself provides important data. The fine material of similar age, the traces of burning as well as the similar orientation suggest that the building and the cellar belong together. The residential space could have been right above the cellar. Walls were supported by the ceilings and the roof by the posts on the central axis. The ceiling of the cellar probably served as a floor for the residential space. The building not only had a complex structure, but a complex function too. The structure made of posts could have had economic use, keeping animals or storing products, while the timber frame dwelling in the cellar occupied the eastern part. The cellar indicates winemaking, or at least the storage of wine, and the pantry enabled the storage of food, and we may presume the household was able to produce a surplus. The finds testify for a variety of activities carried out within and beyond the household. On the level of the ash layer, namely on the top of the debris layer of the house, there were a few pine tools which should probably store together because they were found together. Beside the next carving tool, spade shoe, there is a rubber spur, knife, forky, among the finds. All of them were elaborately crafted with fine objects. So we may presume the inhabitants performed or controlled agricultural labor. The land they are well surely meant the ownership of land. Several tools of woodworking, which must have been used not only in the forest but also around the house. Apart from the evidence of production, the evidence of consumption had also been unearthed, for example, the knives and many animal bones. It is difficult to identify precisely the members belonging to the domesticated gender in this archaeological context. The co-resident domestic would surely incorporated men, women, and children, and in terms of social status, the members of a noble family and several servants. The pieces of harness and armor imply a man, presumably a nobleman, and the gilded bronze scalera and the spurs are evidence for military equipment. It was the conventional accessory of noblemen. It looks like the head of the domestic unit served as an equestrian warrior in a Turkish horse. We know exactly from written sources that members of lower nobility lived in the Losh village. Child dress accessories like the pomfaro belongs to the white textile band belts typically worn by women. Bronze dress fasteners and buckles are cheap and well-known finds of late Middle Ages. The household was wealthy enough to take part in the exchange of resources. They had valuables secured with a lock, and this could be kept in the chest. They had access to foreign products. The knife handle with the tulip ending speaks of Balkanic connections. The book 15 of Nuremberg type is evidence for the existence of one book, because we read the Bible, and read what says testifies that textile arrived from Galatians. The scissors could be used for cutting the textile as well as for other purposes. And to our surprise, Renaissance Neolithic tile fragment turned up in Domino's stratigraphic sequence. We know that such portals were only known from private centers like Buda and Viseu, and bishoprics likewise, and their production can be linked to Italian craftsmen arriving with the second line of King Matthias between 1476 to 1490. So these finds represent the strong economical and cultural connections of Hungary with Central Europe and Balkans at the same time, the later Middle Ages. The house had been destroyed in fire, according to the previously mentioned ancient layers and opinions. Chapter evidence is unambiguous that the settlement was destroyed in the 16th century. The same is confirmed by the closing dates of the house. First of all, the diaries of the Emperor Ferdinand I, dated to 350 to you can see it. The earliest bones date from the time of the previously mentioned King Matthias. The finds presented here are reflect the material culture of about 50 or 60 years, so we presume that this is how long the building lasted. Conclusions. Metal objects found on the surface can reveal aspects of trade connections, economic activities of the community or village, but do not represent the totality of the tools used in the household. The objects alerted that middle excavation didn't come from the waste. They represent the actual wealth and of their possessors and the actual tools used in the daily routine. So this is a fair and lucky case. The household was wealthy and inhabited by members of higher social status. They relied their subsistence on animal husbandry and agriculture, and their income secured access to foreign products. But this relative richness is unusual only because we can seldom document the elements of the contemporary material culture in their entirety. The house was placed on a mound stretching northwest-southeast, and with the help of a metal detector, we have found other rich finds, collected other rich finds, denoting other households with a similar level of social status or same level of prosperity. So we may conclude that this assemblage represents the average usual roots and belongings of the members of global utility in political relations.
Thank you very much, Tibor. Are there any questions or comments for him about his presentation on the finds from the fields and the finds from the excavation? Yeah, Neil.
Tibor, thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. Can I just ask a methodological question about the metal detecting?
Yeah.
Were there any restrictions applied to the depth of the excavations of the metal detectors? If they got a target, did they have freedom to dig as deeply as they wished, or?
Just legislation for that. They can use their device only if they are accompanied by an archaeologist, or if they spend enough time in our program, 2 or 3 years, when they have an agreement with the museum, so they cannot go on their own, and they may only dig to 30 centimeters. And you have to know that in Hungary, the deep plowing brought the archaeological evidence to the surface, so these are in the secondary positions. These are all disturbed finds. So they do not disturb the archaeological features. They just collect the metal finds from the surface.
Thank you very much.
Other questions and comments?
Tibor, many thanks for an amazing presentation. Actually, I would 2 questions or maybe 2 remarks, but the second one is the and Kerala, so Central Europe in general, and it's something missing in this Ruralia actually, because we haven't spoken about changes in cities and in markets. So actually, at the beginning of the early modern period, growth of market integration. So connections between cities, towns, and this change we see in rural household and noble household. So what I would like to say that we see noble family connected probably with a neighbor city or to the local market, but in the household assemblage we see growth of market integration at the later medieval period, and so actually we see changes in market system and in cities, and we haven't spoken about cities and in this Ruralia, of course. So it's only one general remark, and it would be possible to continue that in this time actually Central Europe share the same political system, the same king. So actually it's really important to see this market integration, political integration in one small pit or cellar. What was it? So and actually my first question, not so important, that it's always problematic to date the chronological aspects of metal detector findings, and it's difficult to date iron objects actually. So very difficult to, I think, to distinguish among early modern iron findings and late or high medieval.
Thank you for your comment and question. Starting with the second one, yes, it's difficult to discern this fine dating, and we can only make it if on that single side there are no other periods. So when the village lasted for about 100 and 200 years, but when you have metal finds, about 200 or 300 metal finds, then you have quite precise dating of that village. And we have many coins. I didn't have the time to involve the dating of the coins, but every village here has been dated with coins. So this is one aspect which makes easier to date the iron finds. And the trade connections, I didn't mention the trade connection of the household. I said it's the connections of Hungary, because I'm aware that those living in the household did not make these travels to these towns, so they had their goods and valuables somewhere in Buda in the market. So it was the Hungary's trade connections, and these people traveled to these markets, and they brought, I don't know, agricultural goods to have the textile, for example. Metal detector finds can reveal the intensive cultural and trade connections of a special region in different periods. We have, from the High Middle Ages, many aspects which relate that Hungary had very close connections with Byzantium, with the Rus, and much less connections with Western Europe. And the whole thing changes around in the 14th century. Central Europe and Western Europe become the most important targets in these connections.
Okay, thank you very much. Ars, is there any more questions? Rainer.
Again, a question on the methodology. Is there a single point measurement for all these survey finds? Because you showed just the cluster, regional clusters and statistics. Do you have a single point measurement for each find?
The exact measurement for exactly what? For the quantity?
For each piece, do you have coordinates for each piece?
Yes, mainly. This program started 10 years ago when metal detectorists came to our museum, and at that time this protocol was not strict, the legislation was not that strict, and they made surveys on their own earlier for years, and those finds do not have coordinates. Here I mentioned 1,460 pieces, but there are 1,000 other pieces I know from this region, because these people are living now in Dobos and Ternad, and when they brought us this material, they could not tell from which part of the southern Pest County they come from, so I could not involve those products, those objects in the statistics, and that's a shame.
Okay.
Are there any last questions? Are there any questions online that have been posed? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tibor. And for our second presentation this morning, Andrei Yanesh is going to speak about a prince in the mud. Can the houseware indicate the existence of a social class? And he is joining us online.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, we can hear you well, and we can see you.
Hello, everybody. I'm sorry for not being there with you, but I'll try to somehow connect with you through this paper. See how this is working. Do you see this?
Can you turn the sound off on your computer, because there's feedback, or reduce it considerably?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, okay. Let's do this. I will present you the summary types.
Sorry, Andrei. Just before you start.
Items, but also some other finds found in the region of Slavonia, which was during the Middle Ages part of the Hungarian kingdom, the southern rim of this large kingdom, and it's situated between the Sava and the Drava rivers, respectively. The region was divided in a few counties in the medieval period, and mostly governed by the local governors that were appointed by the Hungarian king mostly. The social structure of this region consists mainly of lay nobility that had large holdings in the area, but also mixed with the holdings and territories of some church noblemen and monastic religious orders. The interesting thing about the region and its social complexities is that most of the high nobility connected to the king had their possessions in the fringes and the border areas of this region, mostly in the western area, here towards the Holy Roman Empire, and in the southeastern edge of Slavonia, actually of the Hungarian kingdom, towards the Byzantine Empire, later on the Bosnian and Serbian kingdoms. But the other interesting thing that will be also visible in some finds is that the area in between the so-called Körös or Križevci county and the region of Turopolje was mostly inhabited, but the estates there were held mostly by the lower gentry or the lower nobility, also from known sometimes in the written sources as the Jobagiones Castri, or the so-called castle warriors. What do we find from this noble elites in all types of medieval sites are always and almost entirely, and not entirely, but mostly connected to the feasts, eating and drinking habits. And it will be also visible that this type of finds could be connected to some rural sites, mostly the tableware and the cutlery, but also some other finds, especially as the riders' equipment. I would here try to compare the noble seats and the finds from these sites to the rural sites excavated in the Slavonian region. And the types of noble seeds that were that can be excavated and researched in this region are especially castles, the manor houses, and palaces. But looking at the historical development of Croatian archaeology in these areas, the castles are mostly represented, with the palaces obviously concentrated in urban areas, and we actually unfortunately lack any research of manor houses at the moment or published data. But so the most of the research data and excavated data come from castles. Some castles, I will show you just some examples of castles, and this is mostly similar to any in the, not only just in the region, but also most in the Hungarian kingdom, like the castle of Verbovec with its tableware of this type, the cups, glazed cups, and of course the some sign of the nobles of other social not other social classes, but the leading social classes of the medieval period is of course the riders' equipment, and the equipment is mostly represented by the spurs, and we can say that it is defines the rider in this period. This castle belonged to the high nobility in the estates of high nobility, the families of the Crescent family that ruled these areas and mostly were connected to the Hungarian court. The other one is also similar finds from an Eastern Slavonian castle, the Ružica castle, which was actually part of the Ulaki Kindred, the very large and important Hungarian family that these areas, and we can find the similar finds of jugs and tableware, cutlery, and of course spurs and riders' equipment. And also another example of the nobility, but finds from the seat of a lower gentry, of a smaller lower noble family. The same finds are visible here. This very similar to the high noble seats with the almost the same type of finds. If we look at the other part of the medieval society of Slavonia, the part with the lower social classes, as we can call them, the medieval villages that were researched in the area, as you can see here on the map. I'll show you some finds from the research site of Stari Perkovci Sela, which is situated in Eastern Slavonia. It is a village that was excavated during the rescue excavations on the highways. Very large, some 6,000 square meters of the village were uncovered. We were able to recognize and interpret around a dozen of houses or dwelling structures, mostly of the above ground type. Among the finds in this village and the households, we can say that one is a little bit different from the others. The household 6, with something that could be mentioned as noble finds. Among other finds of this type are the imported Buddha whiteware, cups and jugs, and the cavalry rider spurs, but also finds of stove tiles that indicate that this household also was heated by a stove. That this was not the only find on the site. The finds from other pits in the village with the same type of red painted ware, with mostly cups, large cups, and some types of pots, small cups on foots, bottles, and other types of jugs, all that are interpreted as fineware or fine tableware. Also, we have 4 or 5 spurs in the side, and also something that shows us a possible presence of a elite person is the tip of a sword scabbard. That this is not a rare find in the rural context of the Slavonian villages. We find in other excavated sites, like the Janovci site near Donje Miholjac, which is situated by the Drava River, with similar finds of cups and red painted ware, but also of spurs. Very similar finds are found in another Slavonian village of Beketinci Pentej. The same type of cups, jugs, and bottles, ceramic bottles, with the large amount of spurs, but with also a special find of a papal bull from the Pope Gregory XI from the 14th century. This is a very rare find, since most of the papal bulls found in archaeological contexts in Croatia were found in the monastic sites, 6 in a Benedictine monastery, 1 in a Pauline monastery, and 1 also in a temple preceptory. So this is a very rare find in rural contexts, and it was found inside a baking oven. The site of Burdel, which is located more to the west, near Zagreb, in the region of Turopolje, was excavated, and a pit with a very large amount of stove tiles were found, and it was interpreted as a possible household of a local lower nobleman that had the financial possibility to have its house heated by a large stove. And another example, call them elite finds from the site of Kobelic I from the 13th century, some a bit earlier than the before mentioned sites. The find of a pattern welded knife was interpreted as a Bohemian import, possible Bohemian import, and a sign again of a local noble that belonged to the lower gentry of this region. So for the end, I could not give you any clear conclusion, but put some more questions on the table on the presence of nobles in the medieval villages. Do these finds prove us the existence of nobles in such environments? Or can we, the tableware, the cutlery, and especially the rider equipment that were found in such sites, be a sign of an elite social group, or maybe a fashion statement of the era? Also, as I mentioned before, the excavated sites were found all around the Slavonian region, with the last 2 sites in the regions that had historical documented lower gentry or lower nobility, but the first 3 rural sites belong to areas that have no written records of such type of nobility, and they were all governed by or belonged to estates that were governed, and the owners were members of the high elite nobility. So can we speak of undocumented lower nobility in these areas, or maybe even in the sense of some well situated peasants that lived in such villages? And with these questions, I will thank you for your attention.
Please send. Thank you. Yeah, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can.
Super, okay. Bert,
Hope you heard me.
Bert, do you want to repeat your question in brief?
Well, very brief then. Your research, thank you very much, again, reminds me very much of research done by our colleague Jan van Doesburg in the Netherlands, who did the same sort of study and tried to figure out whether or not rider equipment, etc., are really indicative for the higher social classes, for nobility. And he came to the conclusion that probably rider equipment was also used on a much lower social level. And he did more or less the same research as you did, so it might be a good idea to get in contact with him. That's only a remark.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It is. Well, the problem is that still the data from other excavated villages is not published, so we do not actually know the amount of the equipment we can research for the topic. So do we all have a large amount of this type of rider equipment in all lot of villages, or is just a small number? So this is a problem for now.
Claudia, I think, has a question.
Thank you, Andrei, very much for this very interesting presentation. And maybe my question connects a bit to what Bert just said. Do you have evidence for workshops that not only the question is who used these objects, but who also produced it? Maybe they were also produced in the villages and used. Do you have some evidence for some workshops?
On the site, this large site, the Becket in Cibenteș with the papal bull, this site has traces of smithies, blacksmith workshops. So for that site, it is a possibility that was so. Also, there's researchers of that village were able to connect it to a historical name of the village, and it looks like that it was a larger center for the area, that village.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Andrei?
Mark, can I say
Yes.
2 words only? I want to congratulate Andrei because it was a very good presentation. It came to me a bit with technical problems, but I hope that I will see it soon other way. And my hope is that these things are going to be soon thoroughly published. Because this problem of nobility and what nobility is representing is in all the countries of Eastern Middle Europe a big problem. It seems to be that it was a very large group of people who was treated themselves as nobility, but a lot of them were having a peasant life. They were living like peasants. And we have it also in Transdanubia in Western Hungary, villages that are confirming this. But we have the same problem as I know also in the Bohemia, Poland. So this is one of the big problems of the region. So it was very good that he opened the discussion in this way. So thank you for this nice presentation.
Thank you, Miklos, for your comments. Andrei, do you want to come say anything more in reply to Miklos's comments?
Well, I can just say that Miklos is right. The Hungarian kingdom, by historical sources, is a kingdom besides, I think, Poland and Scotland that were mentioned with a high percentage of nobility in the overall population, between 5 and 10%. So this is actually a point to look at, that we have, like in Hungary, also the Slavonia and the southern Pannonian part has this, let's call it poor nobility. They have a legal status of a noble, but they don't have the finances to back it up.
So, well, I think that's very interesting. So we have a question of the definition of what really nobility actually means. Are there any other questions either online from our online audience or here? Any questions online? No. Well, I think in that case we should thank both our contributors, Tibor and Andre, for very useful and in many ways, I think, complementary presentations, presenting this problem of how we define social status in terms of fines and the fact that perhaps we need to rethink exactly the definitions that we are using and how we are to connect our historical evidence for nobility with our finds on the ground. So let us thank them again for their contribution. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we will end this morning's session there, and to invite you to, those of us who are here, to invite you to go and have coffee outside. Thank you.
morning again, ladies and gentlemen. We're about to start our second session of the morning. Our session would have two papers in it, but unfortunately I must report that our second paper by our dear colleague Frodo won't be happening. Frodo's not in a position to give his paper, and we send him our very best wishes. Our first paper for this session then is a three-person presentation. Pavel Luma, Jerzy Piakalski, and Anna Wojcik. Forgive my translations. Will present a paper on household goods from excavations at the farmstead of Kopaniak in Poland.
Yeah, okay. Kopaniec settlement established in 14th century, in the 17th century expand onto surrounding lands. These newly cultivated areas were not optimal for farming, the soil often rocky and difficult to till. According to preserved written sources, the new upper part of the village was mostly settled with cottagers, whose initial holdings consist solely of a dwelling and a garden plot. In the eyes of a landlord, the peasants settled in the new section of the village were to serve as a reservoir of labor. The layout of the new village was different than of the medieval part. In contrast with that older section, the buildings and plots in the new area were arranged in a less orderly and organized fashion, as to conform to the more broken terrain, to the sharp differences in elevation, to steep slopes and irregular relief in general. No iconographic sources have been found showing building appearance, yet research and analogies with buildings preserved in nearby areas point to it being of the typical Sudeten timber framing type, wherein the living area and above ground parts were made of wood. The main living room was of square log construction, the rest of the house being of broken stone. Going by analogies, such a room was the center of family life. It held the stove warming the residential part. And the picture that you see here, the picture was taken exactly in Kopaniec, but we don't know the location of this building. So, but it's a very good example of this type of construction, and we see here the main living room. And the left part, it was mostly in almost all cases, the kitchen and the storage room. During archaeological exploration, the entire living area was identified and explored. Stratigraphy shows the gradually occurring changes in the building use from the 18 up to the 1940s, so over 200 years. And it's a main living room and grid with 1 by 1 meter. And we see here on the right side the spot. It's because it was the place when the big tree stood and the small part wasn't fully excavated. The distribution of pottery fragments, glass beds, batons, and coins clearly point to life being concentrated in southeast corner of the living area. Analogy to similar dwellings from the Sudeten, we suspect that this is where the table and benches were seated. Presumably, the original floor was earthen, over time replaced by planks. The laying of a wooden floor in the middle of the 19th century caused a drop in the number of deposited artifacts. In later stages of the dwelling's use, we chiefly find beds, copper buttons, small denomination coins, and clearly smaller size than previously ceramic and glass shards. Excavated tile fragments suggest that the stove had been replaced at least twice. Most recovered pottery shards come from typical kitchenware, from vessels used to store and prepare food. Only a few may be considered to be artistic items of local manufacture, chiefly slipware, plates, and bowls. The finds date to between the end of the 18th and the mid-19th century, point to strong ties with local markets. Only 3 fragments from 2 stoneware jugs made at Bad Muskau, Lausitia, may be perceived as luxury items. The inventory lacks any items which could be identified as imports. This situation changed in later years, but minimally. Evidence for the presence of children is provided by numerous sets of slate pencils for writing on slate tables. These pencils and tablets were accompanied by clay marbles used for games and play. Objects identified with women were fragments of jewelry, mostly glass beads, plus an ornament comb, thumbnails, or glass buttons decorated with floral motifs. A peasant seal dated to middle of 18th century found in front of the dwelling's door. As such, seals are associated with wealthy peasants. It is difficult to explain its presence in the dwelling of a cottager. In spite of lack of analysis of materials from similarly dated dwellings, the nature of collected artifacts points to it being inhabited by a family of several persons. The material status of those families was not high, the cheap decorated objects pointing to the inhabitants satisfying their aesthetical needs inside their financial capability. The inventory of artifacts dating to the period of some 200 years, during which the dwellings was occupied, and directly illustrates the range of material goods the inhabitants had access to. When comparing the results of archaeological exploration with data from the written records, we see many differences. The principal observation is that the written inventories do not include items commonly encountered during archaeological exploration. Another problem is our lack of full understanding of terminology used in the naming and description of listed items. Additionally, inventories do not provide us with information as to where such items were located inside a building. Such records were a simple listing of objects broken down by categories: clothing, household implements and furniture, pewter, and copper items. For Kopaniec, we possess a wealth of written records, a fully preserved archive of the village commune. These records possess individual folders for every property, with various documents concerning their owners and buildings. Besides copies of bills of sale going back to the 17th century, the folders contain inventories of peasants' possession, usually made at their death and drawn up for the purpose of an auction, whose proceeds were to clear the decade's debt to creditors, to pay for the funeral, and pass on to relatives. These sources provide an insight into what did a household own and how much were those items worth. For the archaeologically explored dwellings, only the bills of sale have been preserved. However, the inventories of possessions made for neighboring properties, as well as other holdings in the village, have survived, thus providing materials for comparison purposes. The inventories do possess a drawback, namely the broad time range they cover, the most numerous, dating to the turn of the 18th century and first half of the 19th century. For example, the earthly possessions of cottagers Gottlieb Menzel, died 1846, was split into the following categories: clothing, household furnishing, and bedding. These were evaluated at the 10 thalers, which barely covered the cost of the funeral, 8 thalers. The coffin itself, at 2 thalers, was 4 times as expensive as the wardrobe. His neighbor, Gottlieb Urban, another cottager, died in 1806. Urban's post-mortem inventory also includes clothing and home furnishing, in his case including many carpentry tools. All movables were appraised at over 19 thalers. 5 thalers in cash were found among his effects. The cost of his funeral was 7 thalers. Almost all the remaining cash was used to pay off the decade's debts to 14 individuals. Another preserved inventory from the same dwelling, yet from evidently a different cottager, comes from 1821. Besides many tools that person also left, some personal effects, a category rarely mentioned in such documents. These were a handful of buttons, an old smoking pipe, a small bag of red dye, an old box with paint, planks, 2 bottles for olive oil. 15 items in total. They were bought by other Kopaniec peasants. The estate of cottager Gottlieb Wenner died in 1820. Former inhabitant of plot number 148, was small. The highest appraised item was a cow at 20 thalers. Besides a coat, vest, and 3 caps, the deceased did not possess any other clothing worth auctioning. His movables were evaluated at 10 thalers and consisted of a closet, an axe, a bed, a vessel to storage cabbage, 2 graters, a prayer book, a pewter plate, and 4 clay bowls, 30 items in total. These examples are given to illustrate the wealth of other nearby cottagers. The cottagers living in the upper part of the village are represented as similar level of material wealth. They practically did not own any farming implements besides the hoes listed in the inventories. On the other end of the wealth spectrum, we have the 1813 inventory of the local miller. Here the clothing alone was appraised at 20 thalers. Farm animals, cows, goats, horses at over 100 thalers. Grain at over 150 thalers, with various coins meticulously listed in the inventory, having combined value of 171 thalers. Also listed were pewter plates, 4 dozen, 5 pewter candle holders, 4 cans for storing sugar, and over 40 various drinking glasses. The kitchen and tableware were appraised at 36 thalers. Overall, the miller's estate was worth several times as much as those of the quoted cottagers. And after summing those together, this nicely illustrates the chance between the miller and the rural poor. A common feature of the preserved written inventories is the definitively of objects commonly excavated during archaeological exploration. Only in some specific cases, was the presence of ceramic or glass artifacts recorded. Items such as common pottery and tableware, bottles or cook stoves were as good as never mentioned. On the other hand, archaeology did not uncover any pottery items or tools listed in those inventories. The written records points to the high mobility of both items and of the people living in cottagers' own houses. These dwellings often change owners, while at a man's death, his possessions were auctioned off. Women very rarely appear in the written records. Cottagers' personal possession means were very meager and were auctioned by the villagers' auctioneers. Cottagers were in debt to many persons and rarely had any savings. Archaeological research reveals a highly complex, full of nuanced life they led. This greatly adds to the image based upon written records, which appears to provide a slanted view of life at that time, thus providing basis for a broad discussion over wealth discrepancy in the Silesian countryside. We may reconstruct the inhabitants' family organization, but such observations are difficult to transport onto shorter periods. Analysis of the excavated inventories points to the cottagers having some degree of financial surpluses used to fulfill their needs and desire to possessing luxury items, or simply perceived as such. Most of such demand was met by local suppliers. Thank you very much.
Pavel, thank you very much for a fascinating insight to the more recent past. And there's much in this that links back with our previous session. I think we, in this occasion, have an opportunity for a longer discussion if we wish. And may I open the floor to questions, please?
Thank you very much. Thank you for your very compelling paper. I have two questions. The first one regards the question of abandonment. Why was it abandoned in 1940? Was it? 1940.
The end of the dwelling? Or?
Yeah. Why was abandoned? That's the first question.
Okay. It's a good question. I think that this was in very bad condition. That's why. Because we know that from written sources that the last owner sold it to the neighbor and the building collapsed after that, you know, because the land was more valued than the house.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. And the second question is regarding your excavations. Looking at the household goods, it really seems that in that room that it was. How big was it?
5 to 5.5 meter.
That many things were going on there. So my question is, if you have not considered that in the last moment of this room it was a garbage dump and some of the functionalities you are seeing, they were not
we record
going on
this
there.
layer with garbage, but it was on the top, and under this layer we discovered some other layers, deep 40 to 50 centimeter. So it was stratigraphy there, showing the life of the building.
Thank you. Meta has a question.
Thank you very much. I think that it was very important also to have the cottagers on the spot here. Very interesting. My question goes to the construction of the lists, how and when it was done, because if we look at inventories from where I come from, we perhaps look at the 17th, 18th century inventories, we can see that they are made in different ways. Sometimes it's quite clear that the people are actually going through the house and they list everything, and sometimes it's clear that it is a sort of a after session list where everything is actually ordered and done with, and we have also already taken out the important parts of the inventories to those who might have, if there were any debts, then perhaps the cattle or the rich cauldrons and so, they were already off. And then the list is made of what is left. So can you see the way that it is listed, how it was done and when it was done? Because if not, it can be perhaps difficult to compare them.
No. It was tried in order. You know, they make inventory, they sell all items, and they send money to the other people. You know.
Yeah.
And the family and so on. They divide only money from selling the items.
Mm-hmm.
On a similar note, you mentioned the price of a coffin. Was that an expensive coffin, or was that a normal price?
No, it's not mentioned in written sources. It's only coffin, but it always was for $2. It's very high price for. For example, cottager's funeral, it was something like $10, yes, and the miller funeral, it was $100. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Another question.
I have a question and comment also. What about soil and sediment conditions at the site? Because we know you are in the harsh climate of mountains. There's higher precipitation. So what about soils and sediment? Are there any different conditions inside the object?
It's a very rocky soil. It's I think that very aggressive, and we didn't find some remains of bones or the plants.
And did you carry out, for example, micromorphology?
No.
This is my suggestion. In the Czech Republic, we have research of course, medieval households in city of Brno, and they analyzed using micromorphology the template area inside the houses, and it provides a lot of information about how about the waste management of the households, for example.
Yes, it missed in this case, yeah.
So, for example, you can count number of organic material in the sediment. You cannot observe it by conventional archaeological analysis. But by micromorphology, you can. So this is my suggestion to use it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Another, I suppose, observation about the inventories. This is recording the death of a particular individual. But what about the individual's wider surviving family?
So we have only the contracts with other members of family. For example, wife that they gave her some money, and the end of the story. She left the house, and the house was sold to another cottager, because it was by the law it was the own of lord of the village. Yes, it was not owned by these cottagers permanently.
Wow. Okay. Thomas.
Pavel, many thanks for your excellent paper. We are actually on the threshold of scientific ethnography, I think. So it's very important for all of us. I would like to continue Mette maybe and Niall. Actually, my question is, or general, that the management of household goods was connected with the institutional framework, with property law and so, and with, so it is why maybe these inventories were established, as I understand you. And so it may be different, so it depends on rights of peasants, and Europe was not homogeneous. So it would be.
I think that was slightly connected with the right of some different group of peasants.
Yeah, so we are in the second serfdom.
Yeah, and the inventory is disappearing after the second half of the 19th century because the law changed. Yes.
Yes, because it's very important because there were many changes in the second half of the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century. But my continuation to Meta is that actually maybe these cottagers owned more things. So maybe there were something others what was not described and didn't came in the inventory. And in this case, it is something for us archaeologists because it would be the waste probably. So yes.
I think that some written records missing there still.
Very good. You mentioned the seal.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you picked it up as something odd. The seal itself, it didn't look as if it was particular to a person.
It's we have these seals are very common among wealthy peasants, and they were made in the city. And you see this coat of arms, what is typical, and inside this coat of arms you have usual initials. Yeah.
Okay.
It's but it's very hard. I don't see here some clearly the initials, and it's very hard to identify the person who were using this seal.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions in the room or online? No. Okay, so perhaps we should wind up our session. Thank you very much, Pavel.
Thank you.
And your colleagues for a wonderful presentation. We probably now have some housekeeping. No? We will then be drawing to a close this morning's session for... No?
Yes and no?
Yes and no. All right. Claudia, I'll give it over to you.
Yes, thank you. It's just, I want to send greetings from Frodo. We just got messages from him, so I just want to say that warmly greetings from Frodo, and he's very sad that he is not here. Katharina, when lunch is at 12, and at 1 we leave as 1:30 we leave. Yes, yes. You are right. Some other points. So I have a box of books, and I would like to hand over some books that some of you can send it to the colleagues in your home country. Yes. Okay. Thank you.